Hello, Puget Sound community. This is Luke Poole from Career and Employment Services. Today, as part of our Ask a Logger series, we are joined by Amber Moore, a BLP major from the class of 2017. Amber is currently serving as a market manager at Airbnb in San Francisco, California. Thanks so much for joining us, Amber.
I'm excited to be here, Luke. Thank you.
All right, so we will jump right into questions. So to start us off, could you just describe your job and your employer?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I work for Airbnb based out of our San Francisco headquarters. If you're not familiar with Airbnb, the company is the world's largest platform to book a place to stay. To give you a little bit of context, on any given night, about 2 million people around the globe stay in Airbnb, not necessarily right now during COVID-19, but on average. And in my scope of work, I am a market manager for the hotels and service apartment supply team at Airbnb. So what that means is that I have a market, and my market is Orange County, California. And so I work with over 200 hotels in that market to help them meet their revenue and strategy goals. So specifically, I'll work with general managers, hotel owners, revenue managers, et cetera. And I'll work with them to make sure that we're making as much production as we can on our platforms for the hotel.
So I guess how does one get into this line of work?
Yeah. I would say that there's a bunch of different routes that people get into hospitality and travel. Myself in particular, my parents own restaurants. So growing up, I would often bus tables and seat guests and just interact with overall customers coming to the restaurants. And that's how I knew I fell in love with hospitality and service. I would say that there's many different routes to it, and a lot of my colleagues have different routes that they got here, especially with those I work with in my team. Not all come from hospitality, but I would say it's definitely a big benefit to have the operational experience either in restaurants or hotels, just having that baseline and knowledge as a foundation.
Other than, obviously a hospitality major, for those kind of considering this pathway, what are some other majors that would align well with your work?
Yeah, I would say Puget Sound didn't offer hospitality, of course. And so I majored in business. I found that for me, that was most in line with the route I wanted to pursue. I always knew I wanted to go into hospitality. So business for me was a very natural path to gaining a lot of different exposures and mindsets and kind of just a leadership foundation. I really think that there's no specific course or major you can do for hospitality unless the school offers hospitality. I think that anything you can do can translate well. I would say it's more so kind of the experiences you have along the way in college that can help, things that you're involved in. Communications is another great major for hospitality, but it's a lot of it's experience that you have and your feet on the ground in the field.
So what were some of those experiences for you in your undergrad that helped you segue into this?
Yeah. When I was an undergrad at Puget Sound, I had a lot of different internships in hospitality, and that's something that I'd recommend. I really took advantage of internships whenever I could, specifically over the summer and even at times during the school year. Myself in particular, I had hospitality internships in hotel development, hotel operations, wine sales. I did event planning, restaurant operations, just kind of anything I could get my hands on to really understand what in the hospitality industry I was passionate about and what I wasn't. I learned through that I really didn't like event planning, and that surprised me. I thought I would. But I didn't like how many details are involved and how much planning goes into events. So I kind of steered away from that. But when I was in college, I also had an internship at Salish Lodge and Spa, which sits above Snoqualmie Falls. And it was one of the summers I did kind of a rotational housekeeping, front desk, food and beverage. And it made me realize that I really love hotel operations and I love the interactions with guests and just the overall camaraderie of hospitality. So that's kind of how I got into the industry when I was an undergrad. And then when I was a senior at Puget Sound, I decided that after graduation, I really wanted to build a baseline for hotel operations. So I started to search for opportunities when I was a senior to have kind of a hotel operational experience post-grad. So I ended up finding an experience that was a 1-year internship program with Four Seasons Resorts, and it went across the country. So I interned in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Vail, Colorado, and Palm Beach, Florida. And I did, it sounds very glamorous and fun, and it was very fun, but it was far, far from glamorous.
Yeah.
And did everything you could imagine: housekeeping, concierge, in-room dining, front desk, and had a lot of hard and difficult days, but that's
You're
kind of how
setting the stage for someone else's glamorous experience.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You often see people on vacation and you wish that you were on the other side of it. But I mean, it was an amazing, amazing experience that I did for about a year.
So, kind of at the beginning of this journey, like even from undergrad, you started with a very generalized approach and then just kind of whittled down to here's what I really love.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And hospitality is one of those industries that is so large. It encompasses so many different aspects, and you could have so many different passions within it. So I think it's so important to know what about the industry you're passionate about in hospitality, and then honing in on figuring out what path you want to go down after that.
so what was something that what was something that occupied a lot of your thoughts or you worried about as an undergrad or maybe as you became a new professional that you wish you hadn't worried about so much?
That's a great question. Um, I would say I think about this Four Seasons internship program. I heard about it the first semester senior year, and I interviewed for it, and I ended up getting an offer for it, but I almost didn't take it. And the reason being was because for this internship, it was minimum wage, and I was very concerned about how that would play out, how I would pay for general expenses, and especially for traveling with this program. And as you can imagine, the minimum wage varied from state to state, Florida being the lowest amount, kind of between the states. So I was super worried about general expenses, which is a very, very valid concern. But I'm really, really glad I did the program because the company made it work. They gave us food, and they gave us very reasonable housing, and it was something that I also expected or kind of hoped for a certain lifestyle after graduation. And it's kind of taking a step back and realizing that it takes a while over the path of your career to build that. So I wish I worried less about that aspect, and more so the experience I would get from it.
So that's a difficult decision, and I guess if it's not too sensitive of a question, how do you make that work if you're faced with a tremendous experience, but one that you're worried, how do I make ends meet? How do I sustain myself through it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I definitely think it depends person to person. For myself, I asked a lot of questions in the interview process. It was the first year they were offering the internship, so unfortunately, they couldn't give me much insight into what people did in the past, but they kind of shared all the benefits that came with it. So I think just like any job, you're given a wage or a salary, figuring out what are your benefits outside of that wage and salary. Do they provide meals? That's a huge cost cut. If it's a program like this, do they provide housing? Do you have to pay for it? How much is the housing? Is it negotiable? A lot of different aspects. And even though you can't always negotiate wage or salary, you can often negotiate a lot of other things. So like I negotiated my start date, I negotiated the order of my rotation. There was a lot of leeway into that. So it was one that I ended up being able to make work just because I really didn't have too many general living expenses outside of the place that I lived in, because I spent most of my time at the hotel.
I appreciate that insight. Um, so shifting gears, it's kind of like the present day, kind of present pandemic situation. How do you foresee COVID-19 affecting your field in terms of hiring?
I foresee it affecting my field tremendously even now. I truly believe that hospitality and travel is the number one industry affected by COVID-19. Travel specifically, not necessarily by choice, but because governments around the globe are restricting travel to only be essential, which of course is very necessary right now. But that restricts a lot of what we call transient or leisure travel. And that tends to be, it hits a lot of communities hard. So in my industry in particular, Airbnb has been incredibly impacted by COVID-19. There's been a lot of less demand of people traveling, a lot less bookings. But the company as a whole has done a really good job to be flexible during this time. So just a few examples, like we as a company have switched to focusing on online experiences. So experiences that you can book and do in your living room to connect with other people around the globe. I did one last night that was a sake tasting and learning, which was really fun.
That's really cool.
And I mean, the company as well, we're focusing on housing first responders. So finding housing for nurses and doctors, that's what I've been primarily spending my time on these past few weeks. But unfortunately, the industry as a whole is really affected. A lot of companies are doing hiring freezes. Beyond that, they may have laid off or furloughed employees. Airbnb at this time has not done that, and I feel very thankful for that. But I mean, if you're interested in hospitality, I truly believe it's not a time to give up on this industry. It's a really interesting time to join it.
Yeah. But considering how, I mean, you spoke to just the wide range of experiences that people might not think about immediately, but are linked to this work. Maybe a graduating senior can find some kind of work or experience that's kind of proximal to hospitality that they can translate that, when the industry is up and running again. So.
Definitely. Yeah, there are so many experiences that translate very well to hospitality. I think mainly just reflecting on what part of hospitality you're interested in, and then figuring out what skill sets align with that. So like, for example, if you're interested in hotels, figuring out what you're interested in, if it's food and beverage, maybe working on your bartending skills, or if you're interested in culinary, learning a lot of new dishes or something of that regard. There's always something you can learn that translates well into this industry.
So I guess closing final question, what was the experience at Puget Sound that most influenced you as a person?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, we kind of end on a feel good note.
I would say I had a lot of great experiences at Puget Sound that really influenced me positively. If I reflect on it, I think one of the professional skill sets that I felt very prepared for at Puget Sound in the business leadership program was presentation skills. A lot of my colleagues, which I mean, just anyone in the world, public speaking can be very fearful and something that you may not be the best at, but I truly think it is so, so important in any role. And having smaller class sizes and a lot of engagement, we had a lot of presentations. And so that's something that I'm really thankful for. And I recommend to any students to focus when you get a presentation, embrace it and focus a lot on how you present, even more so than your content maybe, because at the end of the day, that's the skill set that will translate really well afterwards. I would say that I also had a professor that I believe is still there, Professor Lynette Claire. My last day, I still remember this, but my last day of consulting class senior year, she had each of us leave the room individually by shaking her hand and then telling her what our next step was, rather than what our career is or immediately what we're doing after graduation, because she really argued, and I believe it too, that everything you do is a next step to something you'll accomplish that's greater in life.
That's awesome, awesome experience, and just kind of a wonderful parting message. I think, especially when things are a bit turbulent, it's so easy to just get fixated on only the next step and only what is the next plan, rather than thinking about it in terms of like the journey as a whole. Really enjoy that.
Definitely. And she also said one other thing that really stands out to me that I still think about regularly. Yeah. She said, you can say anything you want to anyone. It's all about how you say it. And that really resonated with me, that communication is so important. And if you want to say something, whether it's in a professional or personal perspective, say it, but just be cognizant of your approach and showing that you actually care.
And I appreciate, we'll just pass along that shout out. That's So, yeah, well, that's the end of our questions. So that kind of brings our interview to a close. So thank you, Amber, and thank you, guests out there watching this video after the fact, for watching this Ask a Logger interview. If something in this interview sparked a career interest for you, come chat with us. You can visit pugetsound.edu/CES to schedule an appointment. So thanks again, Amber, and goodbye until next time.
Thanks, Luke.